you get Jenny McCarthy, like, with her PhD in Google, telling people that it causes autism.
These are half a century old, like measles vaccines and polio and stuff. There's like the 50s and stuff. Maybe it's longer than half a century, actually. I'm old, sorry.
It used to be when you and I were growing up that people would sneak out to go get drunk or something, and now they're sneaking out to like protect themselves.
Yeah, they're getting vaccinated. Like,
I can't talk about this anymore. I need to punch this Nazi, or
And science was cool and stuff. Yeah, okay. We drank radium water too at the same time, but it's good.
Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I'm Casey Rochefort.
And I'm Erik Rosenbladt.
So, what shall we discuss today?
Well, I noticed, I've heard news reports recently of measles outbreaks in Washington State and other states too across the country.
My God, we've gone back in time.
Yeah, well, I didn't we extinguish those diseases? I thought vaccines solved that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? Like it's weird that everyone kind of got on board with it, just taking it at face value, saw the benefits from it. Polio wiped out, 0 incidents in America. Measles was like basically eradicated. Mumps is gone. And then all of a sudden you get Jenny McCarthy, like, with her PhD in Google, telling people that it causes autism because of some debunked paper in the 90s. Like by the time she said this, it was already well known that wasn't true, and she somehow made it be true in the eye of the public.
Well, because apparently she's some kind of authority, I guess. People listen.
Yeah.
But
it's that Google University degree.
Yeah.
Got nothing on Harvard, but.
But so yeah, I wonder, like, where did this come from, and why is this a thing? I mean, I looked into it a little bit, and there's kind of a small movement to resist vaccination, and it's, I don't know if it's growing or not, but I know it's there.
It seems to be growing, and I think it's kind of a misunderstanding of how numbers work. I think there's a lot of people who see these instances where, the vaccine doesn't work, which does happen. It's like 98, 99% effective, but some people have like a different physiology and it doesn't work.
That's better than condoms, actually.
Right. Yeah. Like you can't really expect perfection out of anything. And
we're talking about a really complex thing. It isn't like, it's not simple by any stretch of the imagination, and so there's going to be a little bit of a margin of error,
right,
in that regard.
Yeah. Considering the immense amount of variability from each human to another, it's amazing that we get that good with the vaccines that we've got. And
these are half a century old, like measles vaccines and polio and stuff. There's like the 50s and stuff. Maybe it's longer than half a century, actually. I'm old, sorry.
I mean, like these are the same people who probably take over-the-counter medications willy-nilly, things that get pushed through maybe faster than 10 years through the FDA. Vaccines are at least 10 years, up to 25 years. before they hit the market, and then they're still monitored for safety. So there's really like nothing to worry about. We've got tons of data saying that they don't cause all these things that people say they do. I don't really understand where the thinking comes from, anything apart from just a general misunderstanding.
Well, don't you think, I mean, is there some risk, some small amount of risk in vaccines? Not the autism thing. I don't know about that. I think that's kind of probably not very likely, but other kinds of risks could there be?
Well, yeah, you could, it's a very serious one. Sometimes when they put the needle in your arm, some people have a sore arm from that. And, I think they even have a colored ribbon for people who have sore arms, raising awareness for sore arms. Basically, that's it. You get a sore arm. Sometimes you get a little fever, but it's not like you don't get sick. A fever doesn't mean you're sick. It just means there's a foreign body. Your immune system has identified that, and it's working harder. Thus, your body temperature increases.
Well, even if you do get sick a little bit, if you don't die and you're not completely miserable, yeah, exactly. I'll say there was a time a long time ago, and it didn't necessarily have anything to do with this study. I wasn't actually aware of it until fairly recently, but I read some other things about vaccines and stuff. I might be a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, and have looked into some of those things. But even back in the 90s, I was kind of against the idea of vaccines from a different angle. It didn't have anything to do with autism or anything. It maybe had to do with secret government control or something like that. Maybe there was something hidden inside the vaccines that they were using to manipulate people or poison them or something. I don't know. But I definitely was against vaccines back then. But over time, it's like you learn things. Like, I am a person who enjoys science, and I learned more things and changed my views. And I'm still a little skeptical. Like, I kind of get where these people are coming from to an extent. But the thing is, when you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint and look at the statistics, it's like the risks. However, let's assume the whole autism study was legit, right? Let's assume it was correct. Let's assume the government's putting crazy things into vaccines. There's some kind of conspiracy. The risks from that are like that. But the risks if you don't get vaccinated are like that. And, you put it on a scale, it's kind of like pretty obvious at that point that the vaccines are preferable to not using them.
Yeah. And it's, there's also a bit of, fallacious reasoning going on, I think, in that, like when it comes to, I don't trust scientists, or I don't trust the government, or whatever, therefore this must be bad. Granted, there might be a possibility, however small, that somebody out there is trying to get you, but possibility does not equal probability. And
true, yeah,
that's the huge jump that a lot of people are making. They're like, well, I don't think the government has my best interests at heart, because of XYZ thing that they did. So I can't see myself trusting them when they say I need vaccines for the good of the people and the health of my children and stuff like that. It's like that's the big one for me, is that the health of their own children, they are putting these ideals above that. That scares me. Like that's what really boils my blood about the whole thing, is that these are innocent, barely autonomous human beings who can't really reason for themselves yet. They depend on their guardians to make sound choices for their health and safety.
Yeah, and it's interesting you should bring that up, actually, because just today, I was reading an article about this sort of it's a trend in the basically in the anti-vaxx movement, within that culture of the parents' kids who don't believe what their parents believe, saying, hey, I want the vaccine, even though my parents don't believe in it. And they're required by law in a lot of states to get parental authorization before they can get a vaccine. I mean, this touches on a lot of stuff. It's not just vaccines. It's sort of like, when do you become a free human being who can make decisions for themselves? And
right,
does your parents' belief or whatever trump your own? But there's a bunch of teenagers and stuff who are like secretly trying to get vaccinated despite their parents' wishes. And it's really fascinating. Like, I haven't gotten all the way through the article, so I don't know it all, but it's
yeah. I mean, it used to be when you and I were growing up that people would sneak out to go get drunk or something, and now they're sneaking out to like protect themselves.
Yeah, they're getting vaccinated. Like, that is kind of interesting. Yeah, and in fact, that statement was made in the article too. that something to that effect. That yeah, things have changed.
1989, a 17-year-old sneaks out to get needles for heroin. 2019, teenager sneaks out to get needles for MMR.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I think that might be its own conversation in its own right. Like, because if you say, well, yeah, of course these kids should be able to be vaccinated against their parents' wishes. Well, where do you draw the line? Like, what if they want to do other things? It starts to get kind of gray.
Yeah, I almost think with that situation, because it's so unique and it has implications that are far reaching, like beyond just self. Like, it's not just about autonomy anymore. I think in those situations, if a kid decides they want to get vaccinated, they should be able to get like a proxy adult signature or something, like somebody else who will vouch for them or something and say, okay, if something happens, he's not going to sue you, and like I'll take the responsibility for that or something. Because I'm sure there's more than enough people who, if a kid came up to them in confidence and was like, my parents are anti-vaxxers, but I'm scared, like I'm in a school with like 1,000 kids and their moms are also anti-vaxxers, and we might get sick, we might die, we might have brain damage. I don't want this. I would totally sign for a kid to do that, because for the biggest reason is that I know there's actually no risk, so I wouldn't be held liable for anything.
Well, that's true, but then it kind of
it opens a lot covered by the Good Samaritan law too, to where the parents can't come back and sue you because you were doing something in good faith for the health of another.
Well, but then it, and that may be, but then it opens a lot of questions. If you can do that, why can't then those same kids, say, have abortions or body modifications or other such things without parental consent? And where do you draw the line? Like, if not this, why not that? And yeah,
well, like I said, this one's like far reaching, not just the self. And like, I suppose the abortion one could be like, that's a big discussion. But as far as like body piercings or something, like that's cosmetic, that's aesthetic, that's kind of.
But then at what point do parental rights come in? When do they override the general need of the public or the individual, the kid? And let's reserve that for another day, because we actually should probably talk about that separately, because we're kind of talking about vaccines right now.
Yeah.
And this is going into a very different tangent. But I really do want to talk about that, because that's really interesting. And I mean, I think it's, to me, I guess, having been on that side of things, and having the views that I do, I really want people to voluntarily participate in this, because the last thing I want is for the government to get involved and start pointing guns at people and compelling people to be injected or be given vaccines forcibly. Compulsory vaccination. Like, I don't want that. I want people to, I guess, see the light, and do it willingly.
That's why we do this show, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It totally is.
We're kind of taking this approach of, diplomatically talking through things that nobody else wants to talk about, or they've thrown their hands in the air and said, I can't talk about this anymore. I need to punch this Nazi, or, like whatever.
Yeah. Well, and people don't want to talk about things rationally. It's like a conversation that should have a rational discussion where you're talking in a logical sense devolves into argument and ad hominem and stuff. And I don't think that serves anybody. Like, you're not going to convince anybody by calling them names. And so I think we need to take a little bit of a little more reasonable approach to this.
Yeah. I think a lot of it does boil down to, in this situation with vaccines, number one, trying your best to explain the numbers, like in layman's terms, like how herd immunity works and why it's important. And the other part is to, depending on what their reasons might be, which is why we really should have someone in to talk for that side.
I agree. Yeah, I would love to hear people's input on this. If you don't believe in vaccination, I want to know why. I want to talk to you, because I mean, the thing is, I've been there, and so yeah, I think it would be interesting to hear their side of things.
Yeah, but
and it might enlighten.
The other thing is, like, whatever their thought process is, we've got to like figure out what that is so we can identify what exactly needs to be explained better. A lot of the times I think it's logical fallacies or cognitive dissonance or cognitive bias. There's a lot of different, like speed bumps in thinking that people get stuck on, and they kind of just shut the door to other information because they get locked into this one idea that, like, there's like alien venom in these vaccines, and you can convince me otherwise. And so, like, I think there's got to be a gentle nudge to get over that speed bump.
Well, sure. And that's the thing. It's like, there was a time where we hailed the creation of vaccines as some kind of something futuristic and amazing, and science was cool and stuff. Yeah, okay, we drank radium water too at the same time, but let's skip aside with that one.
Yeah, the thing is, isn't there like a Salk Institute named after Jonas Salk, the guy who cured polio? Like, that's reverence right there. Like,
if not, why not? There should be. But that's the thing. It's like there's a difference, but yes, there are conspiracies. Yes, the government does and has done really, really awful things in the past, harmful things, definitely very amoral things that yeah, exactly. But the thing is that this is not necessarily connected with that. It's not like the government is this omnipotent, all-powerful entity that controls everything and is the puppet master pulling the strings in every conceivable area. Vaccines, medical science is kind of independent of the government in that regard. Like, and these things have been around for so long.
Yeah.
It's like we have to be able, there's a point where you have to be able to separate yourself from that fear and realize it's kind of a spectrum. And yeah, okay, there's nothing wrong with being skeptical, but there's a point where you're being a little too skeptical.
Yeah. It's that like either or thinking that people get trapped in. They're like
binary thinking.
Yeah, they think it has to be one way or the other. Like there's like an old saying that I've heard a lot, like referring to philandering men. I've heard people say, well, once a cheater, always a cheater. And if you apply that logic to a behavior, doesn't it also stand to reason that if one time they're not a cheater, they're always not a cheater? Like,
yeah, that's a really good point. I've never heard anybody bring that up, but that completely dismisses that argument. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be hypocritical in your reasoning. Like if you're going to think one way about something, you got to ask yourself, is this applicable in every situation or does it contradict itself like that?
Well, in order for logic to be valid, it has to be consistent. You have to be able to apply it to all situations. If you can't, well, it's not valid.
Right. So therefore, if the government did something shady one time and then they tell us we need vaccines, maybe take each situation and evaluate it separately, because that's how life works. We all make decisions in the moment,
Yeah, and just the fact that the government, the state might be recommending or even compelling people to take vaccines doesn't automatically make them bad. Because it's kind of cherry picking to look at just this one thing and say, well, this is bad because the government says we should do it. But then everything else that isn't bad, food safety or I don't know, anything, you could take any kind of thing like that. General safety, OSHA, stuff like that. The things they're actually good. And so why would this one thing be bad? And I mean, it probably goes, I've pondered this for a long time, and maybe some of the resistance might have something to do with the fact that vaccines are strange things that people don't understand, substances that people are being injected with or somehow imbibing, putting into their bodies. They don't know what they do. It's sort of like obfuscated technology in that regard, and they don't know what it is, and so they're fearful of it.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. The thing that's hard to impart on people, but it's actually really quite necessary to just embrace, is that you can't be an expert on everything. You have to defer to the judgment of other people. Like knowledge is built on the shoulders of giants. That's like a really cool saying, because it means that we learn things from other people and we apply that to our own knowledge, and we basically take their summary of what they worked for and take it as truth because it's been proven, and then we don't have to do all that work.
That's how science works. Like
exactly.
You
like,
don't.
That's kind of the core of the scientific method.
Yeah, you don't start off knowing everything. You fail and fail and fail. It's like engineering works the same way. You learn by failure and incrementally grow in your understanding of something.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Now, it's not to say you should always defer to an authority on things, because sometimes people use that against other people, and so I think there's a little bit of critical thinking in there, which sadly is lacking these days. But there's a point where you should realize like, oh yeah, okay, this is correct.
Yeah.
And that's where I got to with vaccines. Like I started off from a position of not understanding and being fearful of it and looking at it from a conspiratorial angle. And then I looked more deeply, which I encourage everybody to do. Like, yeah, really don't just Google something like, why are vaccines bad? No, Google like how they work, the development process, those sorts of things, and understand them, and then make a judgment call.
Yeah.
Because I think that's people go with this cursory sort of analysis where all they do is say, why are vaccines bad? Or how, vaccines bad for my kids or something like that. And that's the end of it. And that's the wrong way to approach it, especially if you care about the safety of your kids.
Yeah. Like, for the sake of the future of all mankind, please try to use unbiased language when you're putting a search into Google. Like, it will do you favors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, don't even look up a statement or a question. More or less, I would say if you do a search for the term vaccine and look up vaccines. Start at Wikipedia. It's actually a pretty good place to start, and it has its flaws, but it's okay. And research it and look at the history of it. Look at the science behind it, and go from there. Start from like a neutral standpoint rather than a biased standpoint. Because if the fact is, if you start with a biased standpoint and you start looking, thinking, being really hyper skeptical of vaccines, well, you're going to go down a rabbit hole that's going to take you towards that sort of angle. And you're never going to get anything to the contrary. And in any situation, you should look at the supportive statements and the contradictory statements, and you should weigh them against each other. And that's what I did. And the pro-vaccine outweighs the anti-vaccine in that regard, logically.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, ride the fence of appealing to emotion or whatever, but I gotta say, like, if your kid happens to be the one who dies from measles, how crappy are you gonna feel? Like, just think about the implications of what's going on here, and use that to like fuel your passion for doing some real actual research into the subject. And like, if you need help understanding something, talk to somebody. I'm sure, through degrees of separation, you probably know somebody who has at least a little bit of knowledge about, biology or chemistry or something that could probably explain to you how these vaccines do what they do, and how they don't do what you think they might be doing.
Sure. Well, and what you mentioned earlier made me think, like, imagine if you chose to not vaccinate your kids against these common illnesses and your kid died of measles. You'd probably be wishing that they had not died of measles and instead had been afflicted with autism and been alive.
Yeah. Though that doesn't happen from vaccines.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And I think this kind of discussion is really important. I think it's something that doesn't happen very often because people are so apt to jump on this sort of ad hominem bandwagon, one side or another. I mean, both sides are participatory in this, that no one's exempt from it. I think and it doesn't do anybody any good. If you believe firmly in vaccines and you talk to an anti-vaxxer and you start calling them names and that's your angle, that's your whole argument, well, you've just lost. And now they're going to be an anti-vaxxer forever because you've just justified their case. So the best thing to do is to have a rational conversation. And I think we should. Yeah. You have any other thoughts on that? I mean, you are a biologist, so I hold defer to your superior knowledge in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a 10 times greater chance to be struck and killed by lightning than to have an adverse reaction to a vaccine. And, I think that's a good, easy number for people to digest.
Yeah, because how many people know somebody who's been struck by lightning?
Maybe I met somebody. I don't know that I know somebody, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you look at the odds, I mean, that's
Yeah, and here's the thing I was talking about earlier with not understanding things fully. Like, I am a biologist, but there's so many like subdivisions of biology that go like really deep into stuff, like a deeper understanding. I couldn't tell you how to inactivate a virus and turn it into a vaccine. I understand the basics of how it works. I've spliced DNA in a lab before, things like that. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty, I'm deferring to the knowledge of others, and
yeah,
and it's like peer reviewed knowledge that's repeatable, and it's demonstrated time and time again, and that's what tells you if something is worth believing at face value. If it's repeated, and lots of people are saying, yep, that's true, it's a pretty good chance that that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you have like one or two celebrities and the occasional researcher that's got like a wild hair and says something a little off the rails, and you decide that you're going to go with that because they must be like the minority who knows the truth and they're trying to oppress these people, like you're making a lot of big jumps and a lot of assumptions. And
and that's not to say that science, of course, science is constantly challenging itself, and I think that's a good thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking questions and challenging commonly held beliefs about things and testing those. Like, that's what we do. That's how we improve. But why would somebody trust a celebrity? Why would you take the advice of an actor over a scientist when it comes to matters of science? If an actor's talking about acting, like, yeah, I'll totally believe whatever they say. Like, they probably know what they're talking about. But if somebody who is some kind of film star or a singer or something starts telling you things about science or medicine, and why would you act like they're an authority? Why would you defer to them? I can't understand that.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
And that's, and we want to understand. Like, we basically want to know what you're thinking, and we'll do our best to be very courteous and polite and tell you another way of thinking that might make sense to you in the way that we present it, hopefully.
Yeah, and I would love to talk to people, pro-vax people or anti-vax people. I prefer to, I mean, because we're kind of on the same page in this regard. So I think it would be beneficial to talk to somebody who doesn't believe in vaccination. And I'll be a moderator in that regard. Like, I've been there, so I think I could defend their position effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if there's like a virologist or something that could explain this even better than I can in layman's terms, please do so.
Yeah, we don't want to get all hyper technical in this regard, because that's not going to teach anybody anything unless you actually know what you're talking about. So
yeah, and I don't have delusions of grandeur that my bachelor's degree is making me smart or anything. It's like the new associate's degree, after all.
Yeah, well, you definitely know more about biology than I do, so there you go. It'd be really interesting to have a conversation with somebody. And that's not. I don't want to have a conversation with an anti-vaxxer in the sense that I'm going to like beat them up over something. Like, I genuinely, I want to know where they're coming from. And I think other people do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of covered a lot of stuff here. We kind of like ventured into logic and stuff like that, but I think that's really important, actually, rather than just spewing a lot of the same stuff that these people have already heard, but obviously haven't listened to. So thinking about thinking is often the first thing you've got to do when you need to wrap your head around something you don't quite understand.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
If you got questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Subscribe and like and share and all that good stuff.
And keep the conversation going. We'd love to hear from you. Critiques, praises, whatever. And thanks for deep sink diving into the topic of vaccination with us.
Biology.
Oh yeah, that song. We'll play that on the way out. All right. And have a great day, everybody.
Yeah.